hello and welcome. I can see everyone's filling up the attendee list, so it usually takes everyone a little bit of time just to get onto the webinar. So I'll just wait a few minutes. Okay, we'll get started. So I'm Aaron. Just check that everything's fine. Yeah, I'm Aaron. I'm one of the co-founders of NutriBytes, and today we have Salma with us, and she's going to talk about a practical guide to Ramadan and wellness. And this is something we found as a team within NutriBytes. We found it was really important because one of the reasons why we did first start NutriBytes is to really increase accessibility of education and the inclusiveness of our care as nutrition professionals. And obviously Ramadan's coming up, and it's really important that as clinicians, as dietitians, as nutritionists, as individuals, we know we are culturally competent in this area. So we thought, who better to ask than Salma to talk about this area and make sure we're all as culturally competent as possible. And even if you think you know about this area or are familiar with it, I think it's really important, especially for myself, to sort of have a refresher each year right before the season, just to make sure we're as competent as possible when we are looking after our patients or looking after the wider population. So I will go through a little bit of the agenda of how things look today. I'm Aaron. I'm doing the introduction and housekeeping, and then we'll have the presentation from Salma. If you're having any technical issues, if you're having any technical issues, Su Yin has kindly volunteered to help us out there. Feel free to email Su Yin or message in the chat, and they will obviously help you out. Throughout the webinar, you can ask questions. You can put them in the question box, and then we will answer a few of them at the end. If you put them in the question box, only the host and the panelists can see it. So me and Salma and a few of the NutriBytes team will see those questions. We might not get to them all, but we will seek to answer them all live this evening. So Salma, she's a specialist diabetes dietitian with over 20 years of experience. She has worked at multiple different places around London. She was co-author of the Carbs and Cows World Food Book, which is the first. We all know, if you've ever worked in diabetes, you know the Carbs and Cows book. So the World Food Book creates sort of visual awareness resources for ethnic communities. So it helps us to count the carbohydrates and calories in those particular foods, which is needed because the original Carbs and Cows probably arguably didn't do a good enough job. That's my opinion, but it's a needed book anyway. It's a great book, Carbs and Cows, don't get me wrong, but there's always wider array of foods that are available that patients have and consume on a regular basis that we need to be competent of and we need to be able to support them with. And he's the founder of NutriEd, a new education platform for families from diverse communities. So she's really an expert in this area. Her social media handles are on the screen, and I would implore everyone just to give them a follow, because she's definitely a person to watch out for and keep track of the new advancements in the area. So I will hand it over to Salma now. I will stop speaking. I will stop sharing. Okay. So this is where all the technical problems happen, but we will work it out.
Thank you so much, Ed. I'm just going to do a quick test run before we move on. Screen 2.
No, you might have to stop and reshare.
And screen 2. 3.
No, it's not working. Try it one more time, and then I've got the slides on mine. As I said, this is the moment where technology doesn't always do as we command.
if you just give me 1 second, I'll just make sure I've got the right presentation. Just want to make sure that I have the correct version. Sorry, apologies. Technology. Okay, let's give it one more go. Otherwise, I will hand over to Nusrat. Okay, here we go. Okay, testing 1, 2, 3.
No, it stayed stationary.
Okay, there's something. It was working a minute ago. Let's try one last time. If not, then I will just start and it would just be easier if, sorry. Any movement?
Yep, movement.
Okay.
Working.
Lovely. Okay, let's get started. Well, thank you so much, Team NutriBite, for inviting me here today. Aaron, Nusrat, Shian, Sian, it's an honor to be here today, so thank you very much. I'm Salma, like Aaron said, a dietitian by background, many hats in lots of different places at the moment. My current role is really working in developing new exciting resources for lots of digital platforms, ensuring a lot of the new resources, new programs are culturally sort of diverse and are accessible to lots of different communities. Ramadan is something which is very close to my heart. Obviously, I followed the practice of Ramadan, but also because I've been involved with this program for the last 15 so years, and I've been involved with a number of research papers and also some of the guidelines that I'm going to reflect on. So I'm truly humbled to be here today to reflect on some of my practice and also share some really simple sort of knowledge and skills and tips with you all that is going to help you on your in your teaching, and maybe not this year, but even throughout the year and even next year, because Ramadan does come around very soon, and I'll explain to you a little bit how that is. So today's session in the next half an hour is really going to be touching on the importance of pre-Ramadan education. I know this is a bit late. Nusrat did come to me a bit earlier, but unfortunately I was traveling. I was doing lots of Ramadan seminars across the globe. So this was the only Tuesday we could fit in for Nutrient. We're going to reflect on some of the updated IDF, the IDF and Diabetes Ramadan Alliance new updated guidelines, and then how we can tailor these guidelines to our local population. So just starting on a little bit of a reflection of those of you who might not necessarily know a lot about Ramadan. Ramadan is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and it's a 30-day month of fasting. So many Muslims in the UK, so roughly about 3.7 million Muslims, not everybody, but majority of the Muslim communities will choose to fast. And Ramadan this year will start on the 4th of April, but it varies year to year and it depends on, works around the lunar calendar. So every year it will come around 10 days earlier. And this year, Ramadan falls in spring month, which is still a very long month to be without food and drink. And that's why it's even more important to know the risks associated with Ramadan. When we think about Ramadan, the first thing that really comes to our mind is the celebration and the festive part of Ramadan. So that's food, and culturally becomes really important to know how people are going to be eating during the month of Ramadan. So depending on which part of the world you come from, whether it's Africa, whether it's Sub-Sahara or Southeast Asia, lots of people have lots of culturally traditional foods that they will choose to prepare and eat during Ramadan. Now, there's very little data and evidence on the food frequency type surveys during Ramadan, but what we do know that there's lots and lots of research on the benefits of pre-Ramadan education, which I will touch upon about. Now, you're probably thinking, well, whether the person in front of you chooses to fast will depend on 3 core things. Now, when we're talking to somebody who's in front of us, we might not necessarily know their reason to fast, whether it's a religious reason, it could be medical or a personal choice. And we know that there's more and more evidence coming behind intermittent fasting, the 5-2 diet. There's huge amounts of benefits. So we don't necessarily want to be telling our patients not to fast, but giving them the right advice on how to keep safe if they do choose to fast. Just a reflection on the impact of body. Now, this particular slide was not necessarily designed, was developed in Ramadan in mind, but if we think about the benefits of intermittent fasting, it becomes even more important to understand the true benefits of fasting. So we know that Ramadan is anything between 8, depending on which part of the world, but if we look at the UK, we will be fasting for approximately about 18 hours of the day. So this can lead to your body going into a fasting mode, which then leads into the state of ketosis, and also can increase the risk of hyperglycemia in certain people if they're taking certain medications and certain therapies such as insulin. This may cause some difficulties in maintaining your blood glucose, but also the type of energy that is broken down as well. So just keep this in mind, thinking about people who are living with diabetes, but also those people who might not necessarily be living with diabetes, but what will be happening when they do fast. What are the risks? So we know that there's lots of evidence behind the risks associated with fasting, and many of us know that some of the risks include hyperglycemia, dehydration, acute diabetic ketoacidosis, and also hyperglycemia. So if our patient is choosing to fast and they are aware of the risks, how do we manage these conditions in the most safest and the most culturally sensitive way? So the literature behind fasting in Ramadan. So if we take you back to a few decades before, we had lots of research had come out. The first study which came out was the Iftar study, which was a large observational study during Ramadan and people living with diabetes. There were lots of guidelines from the British Muslim Council on Ramadan, but not real nutrition guidance on the recommendation of dietary principles during Ramadan. But in 2016, the International Diabetes Federation collaborated with the Diabetes and Ramadan International Alliance and came up with some guidance on how to best manage Ramadan for people living with diabetes. And this included people with type 1 and with type 2 diabetes. From this guidelines, there were lots of key components our pre-Ramadan education had to involve. And this involved talking about risk quantification, risk stratification, the importance of nutrition, fluid, exercise, medication adjustment, and when to break the fast. We then incorporated this model in lots of the pre-Ramadan education programs that we saw that were coming up. So a good example of a structured Ramadan education program was a program that was developed by Desmond, and that was a Safer Ramadan program, which I was involved with. And they looked at a structured program based on the IDF-DAR guidelines to ensure people who choose to fast should be given the correct information in a more structured manner. However, what we did learn that many places were still not offering pre-Ramadan education to patients before Ramadan. And this is still a huge concern because there's still some places that do, some places that don't. And during COVID, we know that there's been very little face-to-face education. So what more could we do or can we do in the future to ensure that people are receiving that pre-Ramadan education in order to see those improvements during Ramadan and post-Ramadan? This is a study I was involved with, which is a UK-based study, which led to more guidance on pre-Ramadan education. We looked at a control group where there was no education, and then, there was education in comparison to a group that had no education. And what we saw that the group that was offered education in different languages and culturally specific education, which included Arabic, Pakistani, Somali, and Bengali community, there was a significant improvement in the episodes of hyperglycemic events and also in weight reduction. So this was a very small study, and it did actually lead on to developing more guidance around pre-Ramadan education because of the importance of the number of episodes and the reduction in number of episodes in hyperglycemia in those individuals who did receive some pre-Ramadan education. So Ramadan pre-education leads to not just improvement in Ramadan, the risks associated with Ramadan, but also during the year as well. So what we really want to do is capture this time to engage with communities who are very much involved in fasting, where fasting becomes a very much an important part of their daily life. But these habits can then lead on to improving their day-to-day diabetes care or blood pressure care or weight management care throughout the year. And those are the type of messages and habits that we do want to install into people so that they can continue those throughout the year. And what we do know from a lot of studies that have been conducted around offering education, that people do improve their dietary knowledge, can reduce their carbohydrate intake during Ramadan and also post-Ramadan. There is some weight loss in those individuals who do have some sort of pre-Ramadan education. And also another really crucial aspect is smoking cessation. So if you are thinking about talking to people around stopping smoking, the pre-Ramadan education is actually an ideal opportunity because people will stop smoking for 18 hours during the day. And if they can do this, it's a great opportunity to allow people to talk about this is a month where you could give up smoking and maybe continue that practice after the month of Ramadan as well. And then very lastly, just focusing again on reiterating the real importance of pre-Ramadan education. It has come really late this year, but next year I would encourage everybody who is involved with any cult communities where they will be fasting as a great opportunity to engage with them, to talk about some of the therapies, the management, and also calorific intake of carbohydrates and calories. It's a real good opportunity to engage with people that might not necessarily engage with your service, or also you find that they don't necessarily uptake education. You could actually incorporate some basic diabetes education into the pre-Ramadan education as well. I'll just give you a small example of some of the education, pre-Ramadan education, where we used to see that many people on agents such as gliclazide and even insulin were not testing their blood glucose on a day-to-day or a weekly basis. And during the pre-Ramadan education, we would encourage them to be testing more tests frequently during the month of Ramadan, which led to people then coming back and asking about which medications they were on, how to test their blood glucose, how often they should be testing. So these sort of questions they might not necessarily ask you, but if invited to such programs, there is a better engagement and a better understanding of their diabetes education. Another study which reflected on the healthcare professional knowledge of pre-Ramadan education, and this is conducted by my colleague Dr. Hasnain, who looked at the knowledge of Ramadan education, which involved doctors, nurses, dietitians, and nutritionists across the globe. And surprisingly, it showed that our healthcare professionals had very little specific pre-Ramadan education. And this has led to us this year now creating a new platform with an online education provider called My Way to provide pre-Ramadan education to both healthcare professionals and to patients living with diabetes, because there is a huge gap in knowledge in healthcare professionals who do give pre-Ramadan education. So it's not that we might know everything, but we might not necessarily know it in a structured way. So the IDF-DAR guidelines have been updated in 2021 and published in the Diabetes research clinical practice, which includes a very nice chapter, a lengthy chapter on Ramadan Nutrition Plan. Now, this is an abbreviation that is very commonly used across the globe and not necessarily in the UK, but in simple terms, it just basically means a Ramadan nutrition section. So the RNP is an abbreviation which is commonly used in Far East Asia and also in the Middle East. So if I do reference that, it's basically a Ramadan education. The guidelines is that anybody wanting to fast who is according to their risk stratification should be given pre-education on meal planning and on fluid planning. And this is going to reduce the risks of the risks associated with Ramadan. So it's really important that next year we do think about a good structure of our pre-Ramadan education. Now, if you're thinking, how am I going to set up something, without knowing where to go? So the DAR has a really nice a healthcare professional site called the DAR Ramadan Nutrition Plan, which is basically an online education platform for healthcare professionals to create their own education platform and also personalized meal plans for people from different parts of the world. The structure is based on 10 principles and very much based around our diabetes guidelines on healthy eating. So very much following the structure of a quarter of your portion plate should be carbohydrate, quarter of protein, plenty of fruits and vegetables, and every meal plan, which I'm going to reflect on, should have some form of fluid and reducing the amount of oil content at each meal time. So these guidelines have to be then embedded into how we share our practice in our day-to-day education during Ramadan. Very quickly, just running through how the program works. So you can personalize the platform according to the individual's weight and BMI, and then it will calculate according to the region of where they live. So whether they are from an Arab background or from a South Asian background or from a Middle Eastern background or from China, you can actually create a meal plan which is going to be suitable for their cultural needs. So it's a very clever way of working out meal plans in advance. If not even Ramadan, you might even want to use this for your general clinic as well, because it's a really useful way to understand what a 2,000 calorie diet would look like for somebody from Egypt or from Morocco or from Iraq. And it's a really nice way to tailor people's dietary sort of breakdown. And so what the plan does, it will give you a 200 calorie, an 1800 calorie and a 1500 calorie breakdown based on the DAR guidelines, and it will produce a meal plan for you for both the Iftar meal and the Sahur meal, which I'll go on to talk about. So that's the evidence and the guidelines. And now we're going to talk about the practical aspects of Ramadan. So today is really to understand what type of foods we should be encouraging people to have at Sahur, which is the early morning meal when people wake up in the morning before dawn to have their meal before they start fasting, and which is going to keep them full for longer, which is going to keep them hydrated, and also ensuring that they have complete nutrition. We will then reflect on the type of foods that they should be having at Iftar, which I'll go on to talk about. So if we think about Sahur, this is the time where people will be getting up at 4 a.m. in the morning. It's if you try to keep a fast today, it is very difficult to wake up, and trying to consume a heavy meal or having a breakfast at 4 a.m. can have its challenges. So ideally, we should be encouraging people to prepare meals the night before so that if they have very little time, so overnight porridge or overnight chapatis, things like lentils, soups, things that they can have very quickly, so that ensuring that they have very low GI, high complex carbohydrates with some form of protein. So whether that's eggs, I often say to people to boil their eggs the night before. They can even prepare the batter for the scrambled egg or for the omelette, so that you can quickly prepare a healthy, nourishing breakfast that's at 4 a.m. in the morning. And if this is something that you are not able to do, then maybe just some yogurt with some chopped up fruit the night before, so that there is some nutrition and hydration going into your body. Now, if you feel that it's a challenge to have in the morning, then the most important advice to give to the patient is to have the fluid, because without hydration, we know one will have a very difficult day. They will feel tired, lethargic, dehydrated, and the risk of thrombosis as well. So the fluid is highly, highly important. And again, the advice around reducing caffeine, so less teas and coffees, more water and milk for sahur. So like I said, in summary, we want to make sure that the meal at sahur is very much wholesome, whole meal, lots of eggs, beans, dairy foods, less processed carbohydrates as much as possible, and ensuring that there is ample fluid in the morning. This leads on to our next meal, which is the Iftar meal. And this is the meal where people will generally come together as a family. And lots of people might be in congregation or in places of worship, such as the mosques or community centers. People will come together and eat together. Now, this is a really very important time for lots of Muslims, because it's not just about food, but it's about remembering those who are not so privileged and also sharing as well. So I'm just going to quickly run through this slide, because it's basically a reflection of how we bring in the guidelines into our practice for teaching people how to eat at Iftar. If we look at the IDFDAR guidelines, it's not a very good slide, but what they've done is they've broken up the nutritional values into 1200, 1500, 1800, and 2000 calories. So depending on the individual requirements, whether it's a weight management plan or whether it's a weight loss plan, you can tailor the advice according to the individual's need. Based on which part of the world they come from, the app will create a suitable meal plan for the individual. Sometimes it's not always easy to use apps, and we have to be realistic and talk to the person with what type of foods they're eating. So maybe referencing books like the World Food Book, which can show you different portions, and you can just talk to the individual about the type of foods they have and what portions they should be having during Ramadan. Often we find that people will be having a lot of high-fat fried foods, and this is quite common in a lot of the cultures because it's quick, they're tasty, and people want lots of different types of foods. So the advice is to keep your meals wholesome, start off with some sort of soup or salad, and then bring in cultural food like beans, pulses, aubergines, lots of chopped vegetables, and ensuring that the meals are just as balanced during Ramadan than they are any other day. This is really important in order to make sure that you're maintaining your nutrition that you've lost through the day, and also the hydration, because we've not been drinking. So lots of soups, lots of salads can replace that, replenish that water that we've lost. I just missed one thing before I said that. Often people start their fasting with dates, and it's really interesting. There is a paper on the amount of paper or journal on the amount of carbohydrate in dates can vary from anything between 5 grams to 15 grams. And sometimes people will have one date, or they can have 5 dates, depending on the type of dates they're having, and they can consume anything up to 30 grams of carbohydrate just by their dates. So just to be a little bit mindful of advice around how many dates we should be eating at Iftar. Then just running through different meal patterns. So whichever part you're educating, so if somebody is from China or Malaysia, it's really important that the meals are just as balanced. The portion of carbohydrates, the protein matches what the IDFDAR guidelines are suggesting, and then bringing in things like milk, and also if there is any sort of pudding, how do we incorporate this into a 1500 or 2000 calorie diet? So you can see here that the advice has to be very pictorial, has to be simple, and the portion guidance has to be something that people do resonate with. Southeast Asia, so if we take an example of where I work, majority of the Southeast Asia community will be from the Pakistani, the Bengali, or from Afghan. We often find that there's very little resources for the Bengali community and also for the Afghan community, lots of information for the Pakistani community. So that's something that I've been trying to bridge in the last couple of years, is to try to engage with these communities by using some of the commonly eaten foods that they do have, and bring them to these sort of sessions so that we can talk about not just about food, but their diabetes as well. Another community which we often forget about is the African community. So lots of people from West Africa, Nigeria will be fasting. I did a session with the Muslim Council of Nigeria last week, and we had a very good attendance where people are devout Muslims. They will be fasting, and again, thinking about what type of carbohydrates are they familiar with. So things like amala, gari, pap. And if you're not familiar with these foods, maybe reference the World Food Book, which we've listed a lot of the commonly eaten carbohydrates in there, and then maybe show them what type of carbohydrate portions they should be having in comparison to what they do have. So it's a great way to start engaging about portion control as well. And then really the importance of fiber. As we know, some of the common not the risks, but the effects of fasting is from dehydration and lack of fruits and vegetables is constipation, and also a lot of IBS. People complain of bloating and wind, and sometimes I always say, reduce the amount of spicy food. Don't have too much fried foods. It's because we eat too fast, we eat too quickly. Maybe just slow down on what you're eating. Maybe just try to change the type of chapati flour, bread flour, type of rice we're eating, and all these things can improve these impacts quite quickly. Very quickly, apologies if it's just very much South Asian desserts here. I forgot to add in some of the African and the Malay desserts, or any other desserts from any part of the world. Sweets are very, very commonly eaten during the month of Ramadan. So often people after their meal will have some form of dessert. And these are quite high in calories, high in sugar. If you are living with diabetes or not, it can have an impact on your weight, on your diabetes, on your general health and well-being the following day as well, if we're having a lot of sugar intake quite late in the day. So my advice is very much around try to keep your portions very small. Why not try some sweeteners, some natural sweeteners, or maybe just opt for fruit rather than having dessert every other day, and encourage people that, maybe just to reduce the desserts to maybe once a week, or just to stick to very small portions. Something which is missed very easily is sugary drinks. Lots of Muslims will open their fast with fruit juices, with something called sherbet, or with rose water. It's very common, mango syrup. And very quickly, people don't realize that they're consuming lots of calories, sugar, glucose in the form of liquid, without realizing their blood glucose levels can go very high. Many people assume that this is replenishing the thirst of all day, or it's just going to, quench their thirst very quickly. And sadly, a lot of the supermarkets do encourage lots of fruit juices during the month of Ramadan. And it's that perception that we need to have fruit juice when we open our fast. And we need to encourage people to move away from fruit juices and open their fast with water, and plenty of water. And then lastly, the concept of we're not advising people to stop eating the foods that they enjoy. So lots of people would like samosas, spring rolls, foods which are quite high in sugar, high in fat, and we don't want them to have a negative impact on their weight or their blood glucose. Particularly as fasting, we are seeing more and more has huge benefits to our health and long-term conditions, and more evidence around intermittent fasting. We should be encouraging people to try to stick to that 800 to 1200 calorie intake during the month of Ramadan where possible. And this can be done by changing simple practices like swapping from fried to bake, and reducing the portions of sweets, avoiding those sugary drinks. And we can see those true benefits of intermittent fasting. And then just summarizing that the Iftar meal needs to be very much the education essence around reducing the intake of fats and sugars, and also making sure that we're not just focusing on fried foods, and making sure that our meals are balanced, we're well hydrated for the next day. Some of these simple slides that I use in my teaching is how to teach people to reduce the amount of oil intake when they're cooking. It's so easy just to fill up a pan of oil and just bung everything in and cook it. But we see more and more people investing in things like air fryers, pan fry, using spray oils. And food can taste just as nice with reducing the amount of oil content, because remember, a lot of the foods are fried, and that's where most of the calories are coming from. Many people will focus on the starters rather than their main meal, where the starters will have very little nutrition, and the main meals, where they often get missed out, is what people really are missing out on, those essential fiber, minerals, vitamins, etc. So I just want to touch a little bit about, we've talked a lot about Sahur and Iftar now, is where you can go to get more information and where we keep a lot of our resources. So where I work in Northwest London, we have a really intensive digital platform called No Diabetes. Some of you have seen it in the past in my previous teaching sessions. No Diabetes is an open access web-based resource that we've created for people living with diabetes, both type 1, type 2, gestational, and now recognizing that there are going to be lots of young people who are at risk of developing type 2 diabetes and also might be wanting to fast as well. So just focusing on what resources we can share with those individuals who might not necessarily want to come to structured education programs, might not want to attend a pre-Ramadan education. And then we are encouraging more and more use of digital technology to reach out to people. So on the No Diabetes platform, we have a dedicated section for Ramadan, where we've created lots of meal plans. We've created lots of information, lots of videos to assist people with Ramadan. Lots of structured meal plans. If you want to have a look at them, you can do, not just for Ramadan, but throughout the year as well. These are really popular with healthcare professionals when they're talking to people. I've designed these, taking into consideration what people would be having, and then giving them some sort of guidance of portions and also carbohydrate values, thinking about low carbohydrate diets. Also very useful for intermittent fasting if you're thinking about educating or patients are wanting to do intermittent fasting and they're not sure what an 800 calorie diet looks like or what a 1200 calorie diet looks like. These resources can really help and assist people to follow those. These are just some of the images that I've created with Carbs and Cows. I just want to give a big thank you to them for supporting us. I know Aaron mentioned them at the start of the talk. Carbs and Cows have been a huge support to my work and to the diversity that we're trying to create amongst people living with diabetes and those at high risk and who have been affected during COVID. So thank you to Carbs and Cows and No Diabetes for working very closely with myself and my colleague, Dr. Jones St. John, without who this work would not be possible. For those of you who have seen the World Food Book, it is available on Amazon. We make no money from it, so I'm not selling this book for royalties. It is purely an NHS transformation program initiative. And with that, I'd like to say that the Carbs and Cows have now updated their app with all the World Food Books. Some of you might like the blood glucose icon, some of you might not, but it does help people understand in very simple terms what glucose looks like, because not everybody understands what carbohydrates mean, and that was reflected in some of the pilot study that we did with the World Food Book. There is going to be some evidence coming out whether people prefer books to apps, and that's a piece of work that my colleague is looking at and will be sharing very soon. Very lastly, about exercise, if you're worried about encouraging your patients to exercise or not to exercise, there is guidance around exercise. It is absolutely safe to continue your work routines, walking, mild exercise. Just a note for those people who are living with diabetes that the risk of hypoglycemia will increase, and just to make sure that they carry hypo treatment, know when to break your fast. And also, if you are going to take part in the long activity of prayer, which is at the end of the day, please do take a bottle of water with you, because that is an ideal time to consume quite a lot of fluid. There's just one thing that I wanted to touch on was children and diabetes, which has come up a lot recently, and I haven't brought it up in my slides, is whether children should be fasting or not. There is guidance on particularly children with type 1 diabetes. There are guidelines published by the ASPED and the ISPAD community who have written the work in the IDF guidelines. If you are encouraging anybody to fast, my advice would be to encourage them to fast on their during their holidays and their non-school days, because it is very difficult for the school to manage the fasting situation if the child is living with diabetes. But if a child is not living with diabetes and they wish to fast, then I think you have to just bear in mind of the importance of drinking enough fluid during the non-fasting hours and encouraging the family and the child to avoid sugary drinks, fizzy drinks, and processed foods where possible, and salt intake. So that brings me, I've really had to rush today's session. There's so much more I could say. This subject is so passionate to me. I could go on and on about communities and how they eat and how to present to them. But sadly, due to time and opportunity for questions, I have to wrap up. So just reminding everybody that Ramadan is a festive spiritual time for many Muslims around the world. And it is an ideal opportunity to talk to people about their diet, their diabetes, the importance of stop smoking, alcohol. There's lots of things we can talk about by engaging in this topic. Also the importance of the risks associated with Ramadan, but at the same time, the benefits of fasting and intermittent fasting is huge. So why not take this opportunity to talk to people about improving their diabetes, blood pressure, cholesterol, and I think, you know, we all know that there are, I haven't listed any papers today, but I was at a conference a couple of days ago where the speaker from Dr. Riaz Malik from Doha presented very nicely the benefits of intermittent fasting and how we should be encouraging people in Ramadan to stick to an 800-calorie diet in order to achieve those benefits. And then lastly, you know, we need to be mindful to educate people well before Ramadan if there is a need to adjust the medication. I haven't spoken about adjustment, but there has to be some form of medication adjustment, which I normally do with my healthcare professional colleagues, whether it's the nurse or the doctors. We generally do that as a joint session. Now, many of you might be thinking, well, it's really difficult to call people in. Next year, we'll be promoting the My Way Ramadan platform, which is going to be open to everybody. There are going to be two arms to it. One is going to be healthcare professionals, one is going to be patients, and it's going to be free of charge. The idea behind it is that we show our seniors, our transformation program leads, that digital is the way to go because we're going to get far more people on a digital platform than we are face-to-face. And with that, here are some of the resources that I reflected on today. Apart from what I reflected on, I also want to say thank you to Diabetes UK and Desmond for their hard work and contribution to Ramadan education and prevention work that the risks of associated with Ramadan that they've been doing. Particularly Diabetes UK, who have done great work on creating lots of podcasts and lots of webinars this year. So thank you to all our partners. And with that, I would stop and say thank you to you all for listening. So thank you very much.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you. I learned loads there. Well done. Thank you. That sounds like you've done loads of work within that area, but also encouraging the use of digital platforms, digital inclusion, and making sure we access as many communities as possible with education. And I do think that I agree with you, it is the way forward, particularly thinking about how we can educate a large amount of people. They've got busy lives, they can't all come in at certain times as well. It makes it more accessible to people as well. But thank you, that was brilliant. We do have a few questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think we've got time for questions. I'm so sorry I've run a bit late.
Oh, no, it's perfectly fine. I'm sure people don't mind. So we've got the first one. It's would 800 to 1200 calories daily not be too low? How can we support following Ramadan?
So if we look at the evidence from the intermittent fasting, most of the guidance is anything between 800 to 1200 calories, which needs to be tailored to anybody's. There are a huge number of papers coming out on intermittent fasting and Ramadan. And yes, it is low, but if you split your 2 meals a day and you're not having any snacks in a day, it's actually quite easy to follow 800 to 1200 calories during Ramadan, minus the fried foods and the sweets and the sugary drinks. If you're just having your Sahur meal, which is balanced, and your Iftar meal, it is very easy to have 800 calories because in Ramadan, you're not having any snacks, you're not having a lunch, so you're quite easily going to be consuming 1200 calories. Post-Ramadan, again, there are challenges of having 1,200 calories a day, but if the advice is to follow the intermittent fasting, whether it's a 5-2, whether it's the 800-calorie diet, I think once the patient sees the benefits of this particular diet, it becomes easier to follow. 800 is very low, yes, I know, but 1,200 is maintainable and sustainable.
Thank you. Definitely something to look for, especially with might be an opportunity for lifestyle change to kickstart it. So I've got another question that sort of follows along those lines. Can we use meal replacements when trying to pursue weight loss on a 1,200 calorie diet, or should this solely be done on a food first approach?
So there is a paper that has come out in Ramadan and meal replacements in Malaysia. Lots of work is being done in Malaysia, looking at whether meal replacements could be offered as one of the meals in Ramadan for people who are trying to lose weight or maintain their weight, because it can be very challenging to consume your prescriptive diet during the month of Ramadan. As you've seen, there is ample food, there's lots of feasting, and for those individuals who are prescribed an 800-calorie diet, a meal replacement is a much easier way of managing that. From my experiences of running a total diet replacement, so a meal replacement program in Northwest London, it is, and from discussions from our participants, it's much easier for patients to follow an 800-calorie diet on a meal replacement. But from the direct study and the dietary study, you cannot continue on a meal replacement for more than 12 weeks, and we have to reintroduce food. Now, all the large studies have shown that the meal replacements are gradually weaned off after 12 weeks. And then it's sort of like you come off, you have 2 meal replacements and 1 meal, and then you have 1. And if the question is to continue on meal replacements, my answer would be no. Because the evidence is only based on 12 weeks of meal replacement. But having said that, I know many patients like to stay on 1 or 2 meal replacements because it helps them with the prescriptive measurements. Because often people find it's really difficult to calorie count 1,200 calories a day if they're not very good at it. So if that answers your question, but evidence-wise, it's only for 12 weeks.
Brilliant, thank you. And now this one goes to the opposite end of the spectrum. It says, I'm a dietitian in an acute hospital and manage a lot of sick and malnourished patients. Is there anything that I should know over the month of Ramadan in order to better provide care and be more culturally aware?
Absolutely. So there will be people on the other spectrum. We've focused very much on calorie restriction, and we've focused on people living with diabetes. But there are many people who are living with diabetes and might be underweight or just managing their weight. So if you are finding that people are slightly underweight and wanting to fast and you want to be sensitive, then you can still follow the nutrition support advice for individuals like that. So for example, in Sahur, you would encourage them to have more cheese, butter, cream, nuts, and seeds to ensure that calorie intake. And then at Iftar, rather than just focusing on just fried foods, focusing really on things like soups with lots of cream in there, or meals which have added value in terms of butter, cream, or cheese, or crushed nuts. I often say just have like a glass of milk with lots of crushed nuts in them. So the food fortification advice can still be adjusted to Sahur and Iftar, because like I said, we need to tailor this advice. If you're concerned about their weight, you could say to them, maybe not fast this year, or maybe fast just the last 10 days, because that's more when people really want to really take part in the month of spirituality. If the concern is still there, then maybe just prescribing them supplements which they can have at Iftar as a top-up. And it's exactly the same advice, but it will be the lunchtime meal, and the snacks that would be not what they're not be having. And it is possible that their calorie intake will go as low as 1,200 calories. So please do be mindful too that the fortification advice will have to come, 500 calories addition in the morning and 500 calories in the at the Iftar meal.
Thank you. Another question: are there any guidelines for diabetes and medication advice, changes that you would suggest for those in diabetes?
Sure. So I didn't talk about medication because I could be here all day talk. We have a very structured advice around medication advice, and that fits from everything from metformin, sulfonylureas, GLP-1s to SGLT2s and insulin, the different types of insulin. All the guidance is in the IDF-DAR updated guidelines that I've just shared with you today. So what DAR does, it focuses on the individual as the diet, then the medication, and then it will look at the different types of diabetes, so type 1, and then the insulin adjustments, type 2, and medication adjustments. What type of medications have shown improvement during Ramadan, such as reducing the risk of hypoglycemia and also improving outcomes during Ramadan. And there's also guidance on pediatrics as well. There's also guidance on gestational diabetes. And I know this is a very sensitive topic that people don't always like to talk about, is if somebody is pregnant or planning a pregnancy, why should they be fasting? But we have to remember that there are many communities that will still be fasting, whether they are planning a pregnancy or are during gestation. And it is very important that we do talk to the mums and give them the right advice, talk about the risks, as well as how we can keep them safe if they wish to fast.
Thank you. Another one, do you think dietitians should do more pre-work on Ramadan based on what you've advised today?
Absolutely. I think I have been one of the biggest voices in Ramadan diabetes because of my passion to improve engagement and bring out education. And I found this is a platform where people do really engage. My way has been really proactive. A lot of the online platforms are coming on board in starting to create more and more education, and Ramadan is a great way to do that. So I think it would be really good to start thinking about creating an online, maybe a webinar, or maybe just an evening with a dietitian locally, sending out the link to all the practices locally to you. And I think just generating some sort of interest 2 months before, if it's just an online session and you can share that with all your practices, and I think the attendance will be very good. Maybe bringing in a nurse or a pharmacist with yourselves to talk about the medication adjustment, talking about traveling, or talking about hyperglycemia, and also concerns around pediatrics, because lots and lots of dietitians are concerned about children fasting, how to keep them safe, what's the right advice. So I think it's a great opportunity for dietitians to get involved. And it doesn't take a lot, it could just be a simple MS Team Zoom link that you could create, publicize it, share with all your local hospitals, GPs, PCNs, and I think it will be a great way to engage with some of these communities.
Brilliant, thank you. Definitely agree. One last question. I think I've asked a few more questions, but I don't remember as a student learning about different cultures enough. Is there a gap that needs to be filled for student dietitians?
I 100% agree. I mean, I don't remember doing, I studied 20 years ago, things have changed dramatically. I was very fortunate enough to have a placement in a very diverse place like Leicester, where predominantly all the patients that I saw in outpatients were from South Asian background. And I very quickly learned that there is a gap in some of the dietary resources that we need to give out. And also the text-heavy literature that we give to patients is just not what our patients need. So we've moved a long way from, giving out those very lengthy diet sheets and more pictorial, more digital, more, app-based resources. We've got so much out there, but it's just targeting what exactly is the needs of our population or our community. And also trying to be more open in terms of co-design. That's really, really important. The whole World Food Book was co-designed with communities, with healthcare professionals from different backgrounds. Don't be afraid to involve other people if you're developing anything. Going back to the question about universities, I have spoken to lots of universities about how we can bridge this, and just giving a copy of the World Food Book is not going to bridge that, or inviting a cultural dietitian to do 1 or 2 lectures is not going to address some of the health inequalities issues that we've faced during COVID, and we are going to continue to face the challenges. So it would be great if anybody from the academic side is listening today, or to rethink about what more we can do. What sort of things we need to think about when thinking about diversity, expanding our knowledge of all the communities. I mean, we can't learn about every single community, but what we do need to recognize, there are certain communities that are more prevalent than others, and we will see who have a higher risk of developing the long-term conditions, particularly around type 2 diabetes. And it's so important to know which communities. So for example, I have reached out to lots of dietitians and clinicians to learn more about the Bengali diets and diet sheets. Sadly, I have not seen very good resources. Unless anybody has got some, I am desperately in need of Bengali. This happened because I have a colleague who is doing a PhD in the barriers in South Asian community and the dietary changes, and her focus group is in the Bengali community, and she came to me to ask whether there are any resources which are out there for the Bengali community, and we had to quickly put something together for her because there are very limited resources for this particular community, which I'm really surprised about, considering the number of people living with diabetes are from the Bengali community.
Definitely. I mean, this is probably just a follow-up question for myself. Like you said, that diet sheets aren't as useful as say visual information or apps or websites or videos or things like that. What do you think the best way is going forward? So you talked a little bit about digital. There's lots of discussions recently about digital inclusion. What do you think the best way going forward for dietitians who are developing new services, innovating in this area, to make sure that we're including the range of people within our communities, and not just having one sort of focus that you could argue has been done in the past? I'm not saying that technology is particularly worse at including people, but it would almost just mirror in we're just exacerbating health inequalities more. Whereas I think, is there anything we can do or anything we should look at going forward?
One thing,
a lot of experience in this area.
I totally hear what you're saying, whether digital is for everybody or not, and whether we need to go back face to face. So we do need to give people choice, and we've got to remember that digital has taught us that this is an opportunity for people who work long hours, who do shift work, who've got families, who've got children, who the attendance of structured education has been very, very poor because they're not able to take the time out. It's not like they don't want to, but they're not able to. The other concern we have, which should not be a concern, is the language barriers, and we have often translated material into different languages, which when I read, I can't even understand. And I've done lots of translation work on scripting. And when you transcript diet sheets or videos, they become even more complicated. So it's not always the answer to just translate things in different languages, because that's not what people need. People need things which they can relate to, they can resonate with, they can understand. It's simple, and it's something which doesn't overcomplicate things. So if you asked about how dietitians can move forward, or how we can promote digital to best reach out to people, I think the biggest gap, the biggest learning curve for me has been to involve patient participant groups. So where are they, how to reach to them, how to involve them. So I've worked very closely with local health authorities to really grab their knowledge of local communities, and also really reach out to the core key champions in communities. That's number one. Number two, digital. How do we get something on digital, and how do we get it to people who need it? So for example, I was at a conference a couple of days ago, and I asked the audience how many people had actually started a structured education program for Ramadan, and hardly anybody had said they had. So we have all this knowledge, but we're not very good at sharing it. So we really do need to start promoting ourselves more, reaching out to people in the best way possible. If we can't do clinics, we need to do more virtual, we need to do more online courses, we need to go to platforms where people go. So whether it's, whether it's a mosque or a church or a temple, we need to reach out to avenues where people are already existing in a forum, and rather than creating our own new forums where people might not necessarily come to. So we need to go to people rather than expecting people to come to us, and that is the way forward.
Brilliant, yeah. Instead of saying you come to this random building on the outskirts of the hospital where we've managed to book for the evening, go to them. Definitely that's a really good advice going forward. But thank you so much for the really informative, educational webinar. I would ask people to find Salma online, follow her work as well. She's put lots of references in here. Those who haven't jotted down the reference, you will be sent a recording, and we will have the sort of the different things linked to in this in the bottom of the description of the video. And in that with this particular webinar, we plan to share it widely. It will be freely available. So the link that you will get will be able to be shared with colleagues. It will be able to be shared in the future, and it'll be accessible online for those individuals that maybe aren't here today, and they'll get the recording. So it'll be available for years to come. So,
until the evidence changes.
Until the evidence changes, yeah. Obviously, I'll have a date on and things like that. But I mean, I think that the really important thing that I don't think will change is definitely that pre-work, definitely building out those education sessions. That's something I've got from this, but building out those education sessions, those resources in advance, so that we can reach those communities early on, get the people involved, get the message around, see them where they are, and help them with the guidelines.
Do not be shy. Do not be shy about talking about different cultures, because we are all learning. So don't be afraid to talk about cultures that you're not comfortable with or you don't know. Just pick up the World Food Book, take the app, take some pictures off the internet, and showcase what you're good at is, putting science into nutrition, and that's what we do.
Yeah, and we work with the communities to they provide they're more competent in a certain area. We might be more competent in a certain area, and we combine our knowledge to make our advice more accessible. But thank you so much, and thank you everyone for attending today. So I will tell everybody. So our next webinar, we haven't got a fancy slide just yet, but our next webinar will be on the topic of eating disorders, and that will be on the 12th of April. And we haven't got a title yet, but the topic is really focused around, I've talked to the speaker, and I'm not going to announce it yet. We will announce it online in due time. So make sure you're following our social media channels, sign up to our email list, but it'll be around sort of the mindfulness and the knowledge of eating disorders for all clinicians, wherever you're working. So those who don't work in an eating disorder setting this will be a useful webinar for yourselves, because we'll see patients with eating disorders as dietitians. So it's important that we know what to do, the best way to support them, and also best way to support them when services might not be as available as they should be. I'm going to say that right there. They should be more available, but they're not. So the best way dietitians can appropriately support those individuals within different settings. And a lot of the focus is around anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa, but there's lots of different eating disorders that people can have, and within our scope of practice, we want to look at the best way to support them and the resources available. So that will be a really interesting webinar. I'll give you a sneak peek. The name's Jessica Crawley. She's from Manifest Dietetics on Instagram. Those are a sneak peek for those who are attending today, but don't tell anybody. I haven't approved this with my other co-founders, so I might get in trouble after this, but there you go. But thank you so much for attending today. Thank you so much, Salma, for your time. We really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.